as I was saying, Scott, we have quite a few guys from our era at Mary Washington coaching now, which we think is a pretty unique thing. Um, Obviously, myself and Emmett and a couple others in the college game, and then some guys like Glenn at the youth level. Um, but yeah, I think you can go through some different programs in the state, and it's like that. I know William and Mary has some guys in the past, and a few others too. But yeah, for us, we got guys. Matt Lowry coaching down at Atlanta United. We got guys in the past too. Brady Larkin, that's coached at the college level, University of Lynchburg, and then Rochester. We got Matt Lamb coaching at Rhodes College. But I don't know what Glenn and Emmett would say about that. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, or what the commonality is, but pretty unique thing to Mary Wash and our era playing there.
And it's been the same head coach there forever, right?
It was when we were there, Coach Gordon. He was kind of at the tail end, so he definitely gave us maybe some added responsibility. So that probably had something to do with it.
When did he start coaching there?
Man, like 1980.
Yeah, because I think I might have walked in on him when I was on spring break when I was in high school in the late 80s. So, yeah, that wasn't a very productive visit.
Are there guys I left out, by the way? Glenn and Emmett, we got more people in the soccer world.
There might be others, but a unique connection to Mary Washington today is the head coach, Jason Kilby, is from Culpeper, which is where Emmett and I grew up. So there's kind of all these different various coaching trees around the state of Virginia, but you see it everywhere in the game, whether it's at the youth level, professional, college. So it's great when you get to these events and you get to see these guys and catch up, and you've known them for 20 plus years. So that makes it a lot of fun.
And you can't forget, Kilby went to Frostburg State. That's where I did my grad assistant job. And that's where Glenn's dad, who is one of the top youth coaches in the state, obviously from Culpeper, he played at Frostburg State. So like Glenn said, you have these funny little connections all over that go off in different tangents, which I think make it pretty funny, pretty unique, but also really cool to follow people's different paths too.
Yeah, so Glenn and Emmett, you guys played in high school together. Glenn, you're just a little bit older, but
a lot older.
Like,
yeah, Glenn was doing the playing when I was on that team. I was a cheerleader on the bench, you know.
Well, I mean, before we hit record, it sounded like he was a little more mature too at one point. So, older and more mature, but. Yeah, so it's interesting. We're here at recording podcast Tales from the Trail. You guys like that title, like Tales from the Recruiting Trail? I think Cheese came up with that one. And I've got Glenn Gray with the Richmond Strikers. We'll get into what he does in a little bit. Tommy DiNuzzo from Hampden-Sydney College in Farmville, Virginia. And Emmett Rutkowski, did I pronounce that correctly? I don't ever want to stumble over a name, who was down at Stetson University in Florida. And all of you guys played at Mary Washington. Was it college back then or University of Mary Washington back then?
It was Mary Washington College my freshman year. So that was 2003. And then in 2004, it changed to University of Mary Washington.
Gotcha. So you guys were all teammates, overlapping teammates back then. And it's one of the things that a recurring theme in these podcasts is a lot of the guys that you or girls that you play with become lifelong friends. And it's important to evaluate the types of people that go to a school to make sure that you fit into the culture and that sort of thing when you're going through the recruiting process. We've talked a lot about that. And it's just as much the recruit's responsibility as it is the coaches and the staff's responsibility to kind of check some boxes there. So yeah, I it'd be good to kind of get into you guys meeting and what you remember of your first college experience together and that sort of thing. If anyone wants to kick that discussion off, I always like to get stories on here. Just it makes things relatable to when kids are listening.
I can start since I'm the oldest, probably. So, Tommy was 2 years behind me, right, Tommy? Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah.
So, I first got introduced to Mary Washington. My older sister went to school there, who Emmett knows very well. His older sister is best friends with my older sister. So, when she was a freshman at college and I was a senior in high school, I used to visit her a lot, got to know the guys on the team, and so it kind of made for an easy transition into college and playing at that level. But then we were fortunate enough to get some pretty strong classes coming in behind me. Tommy's year, 2 years later, and then Emmett came in when I was a senior as a freshman. So throughout the year when our coach at the time, Coach Gordon, was recruiting players, we would always ask, hey, what are some of the players you have coming in? We would host those recruits and get to know them. And obviously knowing their pedigree, we, do the part we could as a player to get them interested in playing at Mary Washington. So obviously I'd known Emmett since I was born. So when he was coming through high school, I was constantly in his ear about coming to Mary Washington. So I guess I was a little bit convincing. I don't know if I played any role in helping convince Tommy to come, but yeah. So fun to have those guys together on the team that I at least when I was a senior, Emma was a freshman at Mary Wash, and then Tommy was a sophomore. So
and yeah, I think it's interesting. Again, everything's connected. And for me, what got me, I didn't even know anything about Mary Washington, even though it was 45 minutes from where I grew up. And then the guy I played for club soccer, his son had played there. So that's what got me down there to see it. I do remember, I don't remember Glenn specifically per se, but I do remember the group of upperclassmen there being pretty welcoming and that type of thing when I did visit. I get that part of it for sure.
I think the culture was really good. You notice, like Glenn, obviously there's a sense of knowing him my whole life, but also when I was in high school, Glenn's team made a run to the state semis, and actually we lost to Mills Godwin. I was in ninth grade. Glenn was a senior, and so it was a big turning point probably in my playing career to see what a cool run the team made, but also just being part of a really successful program. And Glenn was a captain on that team. So when Glenn was already a captain at Mary Wash, it was pretty easy to try to follow in those footsteps when you have that sort of seniority and you have someone that you trust that's been really successful. So it was a pretty easy recruiting tool, to be honest, from Coach Gordon to Glenn. And then meeting Tommy, he was on one of the top club teams up in Northern Virginia. So you had guys that had really good playing pedigrees when you talked to them, that you knew that there was a standard there that was high, and you knew that the team, if we could put different things together, we'd be successful. And so for me, that was something that was really important in finding the right fit. And both those two had a huge role in my decision and some other guys in the class too.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was kind of an easy transition because you knew someone there and that sort of thing. So
hey Scott, I want to go off that for a second. Just with you talking about it, it got me thinking. Man, we're saying all this stuff, how connected everything is, and particularly in Virginia, the soccer scene is so small. Everyone knows each other. Guys are switching teams every 6 months. I think that that's such an important thing, and it makes your life easier in the process to use those older guys and guys also going through the process as resources. Like Emmett just mentioned, he came to Mary Wash, partly because he knew Glenn, that was comfortable. He could stay overnight and do a recruiting visit. And I did the same thing at Lynchburg and some other places too. And it just makes your life so much easier as far as getting all the information you need to make an educated decision down the line. And I think some guys take advantage of that and maybe some others don't within the state.
Glenn, you help place recruits into colleges through the club that you work for, Richmond Strikers. Is that a fairly accurate statement, I guess?
Yeah, so when I left Mary Washington, I decided to try and go the college coaching route, which I did. I was a grad assistant at VCU for a couple of years and was going through my licensing. And my uncle was a longtime college coach at Marshall University, so that was the route I thought I was going to go. And then ended up getting introduced to the world of sports marketing, which is where I work full time. But I've always been able to keep my hand in the game by coaching a youth team, staying connected to guys like Tommy and Emmett and others that are coaching at various levels. And as my full-time job just got more and more busy up in the Northern Virginia area, I transitioned to a college advisory role. And then when I moved down to Richmond in late 2020 with my now wife, Tommy kind of immediately pulled me in and said, hey, the Richmond Strikers could use some help with college advisory. I knew some of the guys over there, but he knew them very well, folks like Jay Howe and Pat McStay, and said, let me connect you with them and just see if there's something there. So that's how it all started. And they had some resources in the past and had obviously it's a very storied youth soccer club. And the teams I played against growing up, just had so many strong players, guys that went on to play in the MLS and all over top college programs like UVA. So my role today is very part-time with the club, but I specifically serve as the college advisory director working with the U16, the U19 boys and girls teams. And so collectively, it's a pretty large number of players. Some age groups, we have 3 or 4 teams. So it's been a fun process for me. I've been doing that since the summer of 2021, so coming on a couple of years now. And just being able to help players understand the college journey and what it takes and really just helping them through that entire process, from the academics to the athletics to the social component to the financial pieces of college. I am by no means a college counselor. I know the soccer side of it, so I lean into friends like Tommy and Emmett all the time when I've got questions from players or from parents I just can't answer. So it makes my job easy, being able to helping them, guide them through the process.
Right. Reason I asked is so obviously you have resources like Tommy and Emmett on here, and I'm sure many others. And just so one of the things that we're trying to do here is provide some insights from people who are, in working with kids day in and day out. And how do you differentiate yourself? What's the first thing that you're advising them to do? And, how does that play with the other 2 guys on this podcast? Like a kid comes to you and says, I want to go to Hampden-Sydney. How do you guide them through that process?
The first thing I do is I try to understand their academics, because you can waste a lot of time if their academics are not in the place that they should be, and it's not aligning with the types of schools that they want to attend. And then the second piece is their playing abilities. So I'm in my role, I'm not with those players day in and day out with the youth teams. So I lean heavily on the coaches to help with those assessments. But the academics piece is pretty easy for me to assess. What is the GPA? What type of grades do they get? What are some of their SAT, ACT scores? One thing I always stress to the players, and I know this is something I'm sure Tommy and Emmett do quite a bit, is like the players have to own the process. Like they've got to take pride in it. And no college coach wants to be hearing from the mom or the dad. They just don't. They want to see the maturity of that youth player. Even at 16, 17 years old, they have to see it because they're about to invest the next 4 years in that player. So that's one thing that I stress with those players is really making sure that it's something that they want. It's not something that their parents want. And then from there, one of the things I've done with the Strikers over the past couple of years is just get some processes in place, just things, in my opinion, that make it easier for the college coach. College coaches get tons of emails, phone calls, highlight videos every single day. So how do you cut through all that clutter? And for me, it's just making sure that the information you deliver to the coaches is really easy to digest, whether it's a player profile, whether it's a team profile, upcoming schedule, and then obviously links, to highlight videos and to game films. So as I've continued to advise players, again, I go back to Tommy, I go back to Emmett, I go back to others and say, guys, what do you find most valuable? And then I take that back to our club and I take it back to our players and our parents. So we just continue to refine the process that way. But you have to start somewhere. And with these players, a lot of them just don't know. And the beauty is college websites have all the information on it that you can possibly need. You can do virtual tours. You can find all the academic, financial information. You can look up rosters. You can watch games. I mean, I travel a lot for my job, and I see these guys play when I'm on the road and I'm sitting at a restaurant. I mean, it's so easy to live stream these games. So for our players, again, it's them taking pride in the development. You go do the research. I as a former college player and college coach, I can tell you that you're probably not going to play at UVA, but here are maybe some other schools that you should think about. And so they have to start with a list, 5 to 10 schools. And then from there, I help to just refine it. And I help them to understand, like, these are realistic schools. These are unrealistic schools. It's okay to have a couple stretch options, but let's put some options on there that, are a good fit for you, but they're also a good fit for that particular college program. And again, a lot of it goes into how much does the player want it? How much research are they going to put in? How much time and energy are they going to put in? And it's pretty evident to me very quickly when I meet with our teams, the beginning of each season. I can just see it on the players' faces which ones want it. And, the communication piece is so key. They're emailing me, they're calling me, they're texting me. They're just asking for that help. Those are the players I love helping because they want it so bad. But again, I would just go back to that. The player has to be the one that drives the process.
So you guys have any, obviously there are things that stand out to you. And so what are some things in the first contact and then subsequent emails or whatever conversations that Emmett, you find like specifically kind of a turnoff? Use that word loosely, the term loosely, but and some things that kind of catch your attention, make it easy for you.
I think the attention to detail has to be really good. For example, Stetson's Division I school, and we're in Florida. We're a liberal arts school. So if someone's saying, "Hey, coach, I'm really interested in your engineering program," that means they haven't gone online and seen that we don't have engineering. There might be a pathway with that, but it's not going to probably be a good option if that's what you're looking and majoring. So being able, and I want to reiterate it because I've heard it on your previous podcasts of, being simple with a good highlight video, possibly a 90-minute match. That's not a Sunday league game. It's maybe one of the best high quality opponents that the team's played. So the level is mostly players that will play at a high level in college or pro, and then have the grades, the cumulative GPA, and whether you've taken, an SAT or ACT, or SAT optional. So, that's different than maybe some schools in Virginia, but having that information organized and then articulated in a well-written email is really important. And it shows the attention to detail, which is something that we stress a lot here with our guys when they come in as an 18-year-old. They have to problem solve well. So if they can't problem solve well or have that attention to detail on that initial email, what's going to happen once they're here? And I can usually tell you the end product of that if we get it wrong. So those are things that are very important that would I look on that first email. And to give you a real life example, that would be, we had a player from Virginia, even though we're in Florida, that emailed us, stayed persistent with it. A guy that I played with in Charlottesville was coaching him. Then I'm calling Glenn. Then I called Tommy as well, did a lot of background on him because I can't always be up there to watch games. And then ultimately, we offered a spot to a guy actually in that Richmond area. And, we took a Virginia player, but there was a lot of thorough research. The player had to really want to come down to a state like Florida instead of staying in the state of Virginia, which, many Virginians do. So there has to be a thorough approach to it. And that'd be like an example of when we've taken a player from Virginia, for example.
Anything to add, Tommy?
Yeah, I want to ask, well, I mean, because for us, it's pretty easy to kind of navigate this process. And look at some of the differentiators, because typically we're just looking at kids from Virginia, North Carolina, a couple other surrounding states. Like, it's pretty easy. We're not looking at internationals, but Emmett is looking at all of that. And it's a lot of Florida kids, internationals, and then some outliers like you just mentioned. So what is your process for like sifting through all that, I guess, and focusing on the kids that really make sense for Stetson?
Yeah, it's a really big net, and Glenn touched on it. You touched on it, Tommy, where the last example I gave, I had to rely on people I really trust. In other examples, where Florida has a lot of talent, so we're one of the only private schools in Division I in Florida. It's very affordable to go to the state schools. We're also the top academic school in Florida, so what comes with that is we don't run into a lot of our competitors in recruiting. It's more clear cut at those schools and how they package and what they do in terms of financial aid and merit scholarships. Ours is a little bit more complicated, so we have to be really creative with it. And one aspect is obviously our backyard's Florida. We have a lot of players from Orlando City. We're about 45 minutes north of there, but we have players that are from up north, such as Virginia, Michigan, New York. I think they bring a little bit different dynamic maybe than you might find from your average Florida player, which is great, right? It creates some diversity from a playing standpoint on your team. And then internationally, I've traveled, and my assistants, our staff, we've been in Europe, Central America, Mexico, South America. So we try to find the right fit. And when I was hired right during COVID. Sometimes it's been a learning process in identifying our correct fit internationally. And we've really, I think we've nailed it now in doing that, but it's finding the right type of players, not just from a soccer standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint and a value standpoint that fit what our school is and how we run our program. And so, so there's a lot of different variables that go through that. And getting to my point is we have to be very careful on how many internationals are brought in, how many kids from Florida, how many players from up north, so that you can create that right team culture, because there's a lot of diversity there and a lot of guys coming from different places. So we rely a lot on our contacts, but we do travel to a lot of those countries too. I was in Honduras a couple of years ago. I was in Paraguay, Argentina, Mexico. We have currently 4 players from Mexico, 2 from Canada. So it fits a lot with our style of play as well, to go into what Tommy was talking about.
I think just to add on that, I think the trust piece is really critical because, as Tommy and Emmett, they have to work so closely with youth coaches and scouts and others when they're identifying players. And they have to make sure that those are coaches that they can trust, that they're not coaches that are just trying to sell them every single player on their team. And so that's something that I take pretty seriously in working with our players at Richmond Strikers, is as I help them identify those lists, I say to myself, is that a player that, I'm going to vouch for? And I'm going to say, yes, they can play at that level. And sometimes it just takes me time to get an understanding of how good they are and then working with their actual day-to-day coach. But, from that perspective, it's really a matter of understanding, yes, this is a player that I'm going to recommend for these reasons. And I think that's how youth coaches and then people that have positions like mine with college advisory build more and more trust. And I know Tommy and Emmett are going to take an email or take a call from me on any player, but I can tell you right now, in the last 3 years that Emmett's been, 4 years he's been at Stetson, I've sent him 1 player, which he ended up taking, a player from Northern Virginia. And very similar to Tommy, like very few players. Like in the last year, and Tommy recruits heavily out of Richmond, I recommended 2 players, maybe 1 player from our U19s. And I'm just very selective because it's important that, they can trust me and they know that I'm not just going to try and push every possible player. Because again, that's a player that they're going to be investing in for the next 4 years. So it's got to be a good fit. They don't want them to come in and out. But again, it's something that, works both ways, in my opinion. You just got to have that level of trust.
Glenn makes a good point too about that I'd like to add on is you hear sometimes, oh, that kid's Division I, Division II, or Division III. And I think a point that needs to be made when educating people is just because a player, it shouldn't be in divisions. It should be more of the style of how that player actually plays the game. How we play the game and how maybe JU, Jacksonville University, or UCF down here in Florida, we might be both successful programs, but we might play very distinct different styles. And so it takes, sometimes a club coach or, the college coach knowing which club coaches kind of coach the same way or play similar styles to a college coordinator, like in Glenn's position, to know, oh, well, this university likes these sort of players, instead of, oh, he's a Division I or he's a Division II player or junior college player, because a player, might not be successful in Division III, but then could maybe help us out at a certain point on the roster, depending on how they play and what they bring to the table.
I want to add to kind of what Glenn was saying too. I think he does a really good job with this, and also having said that, it's great that he's in this role with strikers, but not enough of these types of clubs like strikers have guys in these types of positions to kind of help their kids through the process. But Glenn does a good job staying neutral on it for the most part, and a lot of times when he presents a kid to you, it's not like he's going to come to Hampden-Sydney and he'd be a stud for you or something like that. It's more along the lines of this kid's got something, take a look, see what you think. It's more like that. And it's the polar opposite at a lot of these places and a lot of these bigger clubs we run into all the time. And then the other advantage Glenn has, at least for us and some of these other schools, is he's actually watching college games. There's one club in particular up in Northern Virginia where their college guy is pushing kids on us that could never, ever get on our roster. And he's pushing 10 of them. And he's got no idea what our level of play is. He doesn't know anyone in our program. And he's constantly doing this. And it's not that helpful. And the other club that I'll mention, who does a great job now, but when I first got to Hampden-Sydney, it wasn't that helpful, was a club down in the beach area, which you can probably narrow that down pretty quick. But they were trying to be helpful, mentioning kids to us that we should be recruiting, but they didn't know anybody in our program. They didn't know what our team looked like. And then they saw us play a few times, and now we got a bunch of kids from their club. And it's very, very helpful when they recommend kids and they can compare them to guys in our program already and that type of thing. So I think Glenn does a really good job of kind of letting you kind of connect the dots, but giving you a little bit of what you might see. And then same deal. These guys have to have some understanding of the types of guys you're bringing in, or it's really difficult to, recommend anybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be, obviously it's overwhelming for you guys. It sounds like, Glenn has kind of figured out the nuances of it, so to speak, to tell who, well, it sounds like you're really selective in where you're recommending. You're not even recommending kids. You're just recommending someone takes a look at them. So
there's a place for every player that wants to play.
Yeah.
There is a place. If you have that, I don't want that to be misconstrued that I only recommend certain players. If we have 2 players on our third U19 boys team that are going to play at a Division II school in North Carolina. So there are places to play. Again, it just depends on what type of level of play you want to be playing at, and do the academics match up, and does the location and the campus match up, to all those things, taking the big picture. Something my dad told me when I was going through the process, and I was fortunate enough to have him and then my uncle, who's a college coach, being able to guide me, which again is why I like to do and give back through what I'm doing with the strikers, is if you were to get injured that first day of your college experience during preseason and you had a career-ending injury and you never got to play another minute of soccer, would you still go and enjoy going to that school? And what we're seeing today is, of course, these players going in and out of the portal, transferring, right? all of this change that's happening in college sports with NIL and, but ultimately, like, coaches want players for 4 years. I mean, they want players that they can build over the course of several years. And so the players should have that same mindset. Again, there's some unforeseen things that happen that, you may need to transfer. You might need to move to another school that you just can't predict. But those are things that I always recommend to players as well is, really look at it from a long-term perspective and see the whole picture, not just the soccer piece. Like, to me, you've got to get all these other pieces in place before you can even talk about the soccer piece. Like, you've got to get so many other things in line and so many other things that are a good fit with that school before you can really talk about soccer. And a lot of times you see that player, all they think about is like, well, I just want to play soccer. Tommy and Emmett make good points on just watching games. I mean, again, it's so easy to watch college soccer games now. Whether you're in a city and you can go see several different programs play in your backyard, or if you can stream, any college game that's out there, Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA. So again, it's just a matter of the players investing the time and looking at those games and saying, do I see myself in this program? Does their style of play match where I think I can be successful? And again, you're not going to know that unless you just continue to watch it. I mean, you may think that this particular school is the best fit for you, and then you watch them and you see how they play, and you're like, that's not the way I believe I should be playing, or the way that, or where I'm going to be successful. You just you have to do a lot of research and just see everything there.
Yeah. Going back to your point, I mean, that's what I was trying to get at with doing the work up front and relying on the people around you, asking a lot of questions, and really getting an understanding of the schools that you're looking at before you make any type of decision, right? I mean, you have to make sure that, like you said, I mean, if I tear my ACL tomorrow, am I going to be happy at the school that I chose? So, if it's taken away from you, you still want to be happy where you are. So, you can't have soccer be the sole driver of your decision making. So, Glenn, I think we only have you for a few more minutes. So, in thinking about, we kind of touched on it in the beginning, but that whole, I get stuck on, this is an overwhelming process for people who have no experience in it, right? So a kid who didn't have an older sibling or any friends that happened to, play a college sport, they have no idea what the first step is. So, I mean, at what point, and kids in your club are fortunate that they have you, right? So, otherwise, in your guys' opinion, like, what's a good way to get started? What's a good way to really pick 10, 15, however many schools is starts at the top of the funnel? And then how do you narrow those down in your mind? And then once you've whittled that down, how do you differentiate yourself to get noticed to get a coach to read your email? There's a lot in that question. I apologize.
Yeah, strong question. Emmett, you want to go first?
Sure. I think part of that depends. There's a lot of variables in that too. Are you from Virginia? Are you from Montana? Are you from Texas? Are you from Florida? So I think for any general way to answer that, I would say that email needs to be, again, really clean cut in terms of what's on that email, your grades, your highlights, your game. And then also make sure that you've watched a game. Glenn's brought it up, and you want to make sure you understand the style that a team plays. So many games now are broadcasted that it's really easy to watch. If you're local, you should definitely go to different levels. And in Florida, unfortunately, we don't have D3, and obviously in Virginia, it's really prevalent. So in Florida, though, there's some of the highest level NAIA. D2 is very high level. JUCO is two of the best programs in the country, and Division 1. And it's all very accessible and very affordable to go to different games. So for me, I think attending games, for example, we have a local recruit, doesn't play on the highest level club team. And to be honest, I think that's a blessing sometimes. And, I can go into that later, but he attends almost all of our games and he goes to practices. He's always asking, hey, can I go to training? Hey, coach, I was at your game versus UCF, or I went and watched this game. Hey, coach, are we allowed to go to the Orlando City game where you're playing them? Are we allowed in the stadium? And to me, that shows that he's really passionate about coming specifically to Stetson and that he'll do anything to do it. And he's willing to take time out of his life as a 17-year-old.
Did you offer him a spot yet?
And make those choices. Yeah. What we say in our staff, it's like he's a hatter. We're the hatters here at Stetson. It's like that guy, he's all about it. And to me, when you find players like that, it seems like a small detail, but they're bought into what Glenn just said about being here for 4 years, or we redshirt a lot of guys too, and 4 to 4.5 years where they're bought in to that process. When you do too many transactional relationships, then you're going to have a large group in the portal, especially in Division I. That doesn't fit our university and how we do credits in terms of how much it costs. So when we have guys that we recruit for a while that are, all about coming here, it's a really positive sign, the last few years when we've been recruiting. I hope that answered your question, because I think I went on a tangent on that, but I like that the player was bought in. We watch him. I mean, not a ton of Division I. I don't do a ton of high school recruiting, but I go to his high school games. I'll go to his club games. He's coming to ID camps. He's coming to our games. That's a pretty passionate sort of recruit.
Right. No, I mean, all these are good answers because it just adds another tool to a kid's arsenal that they can use as they're looking to find the right spot. Yeah. Glenn, you have to go?
I've got about 2 more minutes.
Okay.
You should probably throw him a really important question then, Scott.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
You got one, Tommy?
Well, I mean,
I got one.
Oh boy.
How do you deal with parents, Glenn?
Yes.
That's a great question. And very early on in working with the Strikers, I made it clear on my approach, and that is I'm a very busy person with my full-time job, so I don't have time to really deal with a lot of nonsense that comes from parents. And again, it goes back to, pretty quickly on, if a parent reaches out to me and says, hey, I have this play, my son, they want to play in college, my immediate response is, that's great, I can't wait to hear from them. And I leave it at that. And then the parent reaches out, hey, did you hear from Johnny? And I'm like, sure didn't. And he's 16, 17 years old or whatever age. And so I start to kind of be very strategic about how I have the relationship with the parent. The parents are very important in the process. Many parents are very knowledgeable in the college process because they've been to college themselves. So they know that piece of it. There's still some scary pieces to it, but the college soccer, more and more parents have played college and have that experience, but a lot don't. So they need to be a part of the process, and most times they're stroking the check for that child to go to school because, as we know, not many are getting, a full or even partial athletic scholarship. Certainly there's more academic scholarships that are out there. So starting and getting good grades early on is important. So again, going back to the parents piece, again, I think it's important to include them in the process, but again, you got to allow the player to drive it. And more times than not, once you do, then you can really understand how much that player really wants to play at the next level. So at the beginning of each season, I do a big kind of all club meeting with all of our players in the U16, U19 age group. And I just lay it out to them. I say, this is our process as a club. This is how we approach the college advisory journey. these are the tools that we have. Here are the resources that we have. And we continue to stress on certain pieces. So it really helps the parent take a step back and start to say, okay, I've got to allow my child to really drive this forward. So, but there certainly are problem parents. There's parents that are high maintenance. They want to talk all the time about their child. They want to tell me how great their child is. And, you know, again, they're an important part of it, but I just do what I can to make sure that, you know, they're included, but that I keep pushing the onus onto the player and allowing the player to be the person that communicates and moves it forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's vital information for sure. Glenn, do we need to let you go? I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no, thank you. I do have to drop, but enjoyed chatting with you guys. Always happy to hop on here again, Scott, especially if it's with guys like Tommy and Emmett as well, man. What a great crew to chat. So yeah, happy to help. And thanks to these guys. They have incredible programs. They're doing a heck of a job. Makes me proud being a teammate of theirs, being a friend of theirs. So you know, you've got some solid guys giving you great advice on how to navigate the college recruiting process.
Hey, Scott, I just want to say real quick before Glenn goes, next time, if and when we do this again, it might be important to get one of Glenn's mentors from college on here. The guy's name is Greg Savage. He was an incredible player, and he'd be a good person to include down the road.
Great player, really, really good player. Emmett has some good stories. He was a goalkeeper like Emmett, so
Emmett was his backup for a while.
I'm not touching that one.
With that, I'm signing off. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brian. We'll talk to you soon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Take care. All right, let's talk about Glenn.
Perfect. He's all right.
Yeah. He was great to have on. I definitely have to have him on again. I think keep going on parents. Like I said, I mean, this is an intimidating process, overwhelming for a lot of parents, and they tend to kind of operate out of fear, right? I don't want my kid to make mistakes. I don't want my kid to say the wrong thing. And then, you know, you guys start interacting with the kids and you get a little too much parent sometimes. Talk about, like, from your perspective, like, what's too much parent, what's not enough parent, you know, kind of where does just
in the recruiting process, you mean, Scott?
Yeah.
I bet, I mean, mine and Emmett's is probably going to be different just because with some international guys and stuff, their parents probably really aren't all that involved maybe or not as accessible. But for us, yeah, no, I mean, it's just like Glenn said, it's the guys being proactive with the process always. And then we go from there. And I thought he said it well, like parents need to be included because they're the ones paying a majority of the time. So they have to be a part of it and you want to include them. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to the young man, like, again, like taking initiative and going from there. So no, we communicate with parents, but it's never just the parents and that type of thing. It's always the kid. We go through them. And I think parents that I've seen, like in this recent recruiting cycle, seem to have a pretty good mentality with it of, you know, it's his decision. We just have to make sure the financial side works. I'm here to kind of guide them. But that they are kind of deferring to their son and letting them kind of take the lead on it, which sometimes can be a great thing. And then other times you got parents telling you, like, man, I wish they would just commit to Hampden-Sydney. And I'm like, all right, well, tell them to. No, so right. I think it's a balance. They guide them. They're certainly involved in the process, but they shouldn't be the facilitators of the entire thing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a little different for you, I'm guessing, in some cases.
You know, it can be the initial, you know, Zooms and things like that. We'll obviously have, if we're giving out an offer, usually the parents are obviously involved and there's questions. I'm always evaluating a family because if I like them and they're good, you know, good people, you can see how they just handle things on different aspects on a visit. I'm observing. I'll give you an example, maybe not a bad one, but one where, the club coaches are sometimes put in tough situations by parents where if a parent holds, because at club, unless you're in the true MLS next of an MLS team, where those kids play for free. Some of these parents can hold a little bit of power in the club, and these club coaches need to make sure they have to balance giving good recommendations, but also helping what the parents want. And I can sometimes read between those lines. And there's a kid that reached out to us, a month ago, and was really interested in us. And it's kind of at this point was like, well, why are you emailing us now? The parent kept kind of emailing, why we weren't interested, or he's better than this kid. And you're just like, well, at this point, I'm not even going to move forward with this because I'm not going to even entertain attention to this. And so, I'll email the club and just be like, hey, we're not going to move further with this player. I just want to let you know what's going on. Obviously, there's more emotions depending on the stress level of what those kids are going through. But I also have to put it in our hands where, at our level, we need to win games. We got to compete for a championship. That's our job. So we don't play the parent game. As soon as you play that game, you're endangering, our ability to win games, which ultimately is extremely important at Tommy's and my level of being able to win in the fall and not have to worry about parents. And so I think in our process, it's about evaluating the right parents. And I think people in Glenn's situation, in some of the other clubs, it's really important to educate parents the right way and how to go about that process. And at our ID camps, I do actually a presentation of, hey, the difference recruiting an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old on the portal is very different. There's multiple reasons for going on the portal, but an 18-year-old boy coming in, they're not a man yet. And, they might not know how to do even a load of laundry. So what's ever being communicated to that parent while they're here might not actually be happening. So we're very careful about recruiting the correct 18-year-old, but it's a very different recruiting than recruiting a 20 or 21-year-old because they have to be a man at that point and probably be a little bit more accountable. So recruiting different ages in Tommy's and my position is very different in what we're looking for and then how involved that parent is in the process.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but I'm not. So talk a little bit about Tom, you go first, finding, how do you evaluate kids when you're watching them play, when you're watching them walk off the field, whether they're being subbed or whether they're, they've just lost a game or they've just won the game. How are you evaluating them? And, Norris, who's been on here a couple of times, he always uses the line, someone's always watching, right? And so in your guys' experience, what's kind of been things that impressed you aside from the play, and some things that made you kind of scratch your head and maybe scratch them off the list even? These are always good stories, so that's why I ask this question.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one, and that's something we absolutely are paying attention to. Half the time, we're sitting there on the side of the field where these kids are coming off at with their teams, and you see all of it. You see the body language, you see how they're dealing with things, you see how they're reacting as the game's not going their way. So all that stuff's really, really important, and I think particularly early on when you're building a program, it's incredibly important because you don't want to bring in guys that aren't doing the right things in those difficult moments. And then as you get further into establishing your program, I'm 6 years in now at Hampden-Sydney. Now the question kind of shifts a little bit, and it's like, okay, so-and-so might have some of these issues, but, we have a good environment here. No one is doing stuff like that. So can we knock that out of them pretty quick? And that'll be the question. Also, you can call these kids out on it on the front end. And I think that's an important thing too, because that's how we deal with it with our players once they get to the program. So if it's somebody that I really value as a player and someone we like a lot and we think is a good fit, but then we see, bad body language or them being really rude to a teammate or not handling things well on the field, I think you call that out in the recruiting process and you see how they deal with it. And that's a pretty good indication of how they would deal with it once they get to your program. And sometimes I've had difficult conversations like that and guys are incredibly receptive. And then, you see a change and it ends up working out. And then there's other times they just don't get it and you move on in the process. So, I think it's important to call that stuff out if it's someone you're really interested in and like a lot of other things about them. If it's a kid that you don't know that well, that you're not all in on anyway, then it's a really easy way to say, forget about that guy and move on. I'm trying to think about some specific examples here. I mean, and even we do this for other coaches too. I mean, I remember watching a young man a year ago play with his club team who was committed to a D1 school in Virginia. And I watched him play early in the fall, and his attitude was absolutely atrocious. And I called one of the assistant coaches at the school he was going to, and I said, I don't know if you've watched so-and-so lately, but you need to, and it might be worth having a conversation with him now because I don't know that I've seen anything like this. And sure enough, they did talk to him about it, and they got more of the same going on where he is now. So, these things happen like that quite a bit.
Tommy makes a really good point about what stage you are in your program, and it's on a coach maybe when to take those risks. When it was my first year, we probably brought in, it was one of the most talented teams I coached. It was the COVID spring. Results weren't quite there. Obviously a pretty interesting spring, but the last 2 years we've been, two of our more successful years in the last 10 years. And our program went through a stage of 6 head coaches in 7 years. So, if I look back on it, I think Tommy's exactly right, where I probably took too much risk with talent in the beginning instead of some of the other qualities, where now we could probably take a player that's really talented, as we did this past fall in the portal, and he had some issues, but now in our culture this spring has started to really come alive and is a very high level player. Unfortunately, not every player can be categorized as maybe that high level. That's why I wasn't at Stetson to begin with. So it's when a coach can take those risks, and it has to work out for the player. And I think it's important though for players and families to understand that, because when you're in Tommy's or my situation, different coaches have different timelines of when they might want to be able to take those risks with a player that can really help them win, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. But it obviously has to balance whatever Tommy's core values are with his program and mine, if that makes sense.
Hey, and I do want to say, Scott, we're, looking at kind of like the negative sides of this stuff, but also you go out to these games, and I've had multiple situations I can think of right now where I've gone to watch guys play, and I knew they were really good players and guys were really interested in, and I went and watched them play, and they were even better than I realized. And it was not just on the field, but it was from a leadership standpoint, a work rate, the way they're pushing their teammates, all of it. And I remember one specific situation, a young man we were recruiting and really wanted, and I went and watched him play, and he was just unbelievable, not just on the field, but all those other intangible things. And I called him after, and I was like, hey, you're a great player. And I was like, we would love to have you here, but honestly, you need to play Division I soccer. You're at that level, and you're going to be impactful. So let me know how I can help. So there's that too. You get the other side of it where it kind of nudges you to take an interest in these kids even more so.
Yeah, you always hear this from generation, like, oh, the kids these days. And some of the kids we have, there's a point where I'm like, they don't do much wrong. There's so many really good kids out there. So it should be a little bit almost celebrated on sometimes coaches want to see personality, and they want to see guys care and be competitive, obviously in the right way, but almost have a little swag as they're competing. And there's a right way to do that. And that definitely needs to I think you have to understand the difference between that sometimes. And as a coach, you want that because you don't want a bunch of robots out there either playing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Tommy. I mean, a lot of players kind of, or both of you, you're right. You both kind of made this point. Like a player would get overlooked if they're doing positive things. It's the negative ones that garner all the attention. So, um, I guess the experienced coach is going to know what they're looking for. So yeah, talk a little bit about. I was thinking the other day about, you know, if you in life, you know, how important it is to kind of be yourself, whether you're talking to a college coach or you're in a job interview, and how miserable you'll be if you're kind of being evaluated and you're not being yourself. And then you have to spend 4 years somewhere where it was expected that you were one thing and now you're totally different. You guys have experience with kids who you go through a pretty long process, so eventually you probably figure out who they are. But just talk about, you know, maybe that initial conversation, or you know, how important it is just right off the bat to be yourself. Either one.
You know, it seems like a really good Tommy question
Sure.
to start off. He loves it.
So, I mean, first off, I do want to say that like right now for us and a lot of, you know, high level Division III schools, we're getting a lot of juniors on campus. And man, like typically the juniors you're getting on campus this time of year are like super put together. They're super organized. There's a reason they're visiting schools now. And usually they've all done their homework. They're doing all the things that, like Glenn said, these kids should be doing. It's the kids you get much later in the process making their first visits like 6 months from now that it's not always that way. So I've been like just blown away by how on top of it these kids are, how mature they are. And like you just said, Scott, like they're willing to show their personalities right from the beginning. And I think back to what I was like at age 17, 18 years old, hanging around with a college coach that's twice my age or older in other situations. I probably was not personable at all. I probably was barely paying attention. But these kids, I've been so impressed. And then the other thing I would say about as you go through the process, you get to know these kids more and more for sure. But sometimes like it still changes and you don't get to see them for real until they get to your campus and they're in your environment every day and their parents aren't around and they're fully immersed in the team. And usually I would say 9 times out of 10, that's a great, great thing. We got a kid in our program now who went through the process. And, you know, he didn't show us a ton personality wise, respectful, great kid, super nice. But the day he got here, he turned into like one of the funniest people I've ever met. So I think that happens too sometimes. So not very often does it go the other way where someone goes through the process and puts up a facade and then they show up and you're like, I don't know about this kid. Generally, it's the other way around where they go through the process, you appreciate them, they got a good personality, and then they get there and you just like them even more. And you get to see all sides of it. But yeah, it's an impressive thing. Some of these kids, the way they're able to be mature and get it together from day one and be their real self. I certainly was not doing that at that age in this setting.
I think a big way for both a prospective student athlete and then a coach to evaluate a situation that works well with us is having like an on-campus visit, just because we're a school of 2,500, but we train at 10 a.m. So like for us, I love when we have a small-sided day. Those trainings usually get pretty chippy, very competitive, and I like a potential recruit to see what they might be getting into. Some guys might love it, some might not, but we could be recruiting both players. And so it's a way to weed out the process sometimes of like, hey, this kid's going to call after. And I remember the one parent was like, hey, how do you know like when to manage if someone gets hurt? You know, typical like parent question that they might not have played the game. And then the player, like at the end of the day, was like, coach, I want to be in this environment. Like I love it. So it was a good read to be like, hey, this kid's all about it. Where another player might be like, you know, I might like the other school I went to, which that's a good thing because you're starting to curate the process. And you know, like for example, our campus is In Division One, we're competing. UCF down the road has 70,000 students. We're 2,500 students. So the college campus ours is in a small town. You can walk everywhere, or you're on a scooter. At those campuses, you're taking a
Emmett
massive
owns like
bus.
half the buildings in the town, Scott. Pretty cool. Fun fact.
So, I can walk to work actually. So like, it's a different, place in that regard, but that prospective student athlete has to like that. And not everyone likes that. Some really like it. Some love being in that classroom where, hey, it's 12-1 student to professor ratio. Hey, I can just walk in my coach's office because it's right above our locker room, which is right next to our field. Some teams we compete with, they got to take vans to their field. They don't really interact with some of the other players, maybe on their team, other than just training. Those are all variables that are so important in the process, because ours is very different. It's more, you see the same people every day that has an intimate feel, but you're still going to see new people. Where at a bigger school, maybe you actually want to see new people every day. There's no right or wrong answer to that. It's just, what does the kid want? And that's
Right.
why I love those visits where they get a chance to meet the team. They get to be in the locker room for training. They're out of training, and then they're seeing campus and seeing the interactions and observing it, while they're on campus. I think it's some of the best things someone can do.
I mean, I want to go back to one thing that you brought up a couple times, just for kind of the uninitiated, new families. Talk a little bit more about, you mentioned style of play and how it's important to be able to fit into that. Tell me a little bit about like how a kid can evaluate different styles of play and that sort of thing, just on a level of, even for a parent who may not know anything.
Sure. U.S. soccer, for example, there's a period of time when we were developing players where every team had to play a 4-3-3. The goalkeeper on all kicks had to go short, where when Tommy and I were playing, I think keepers were like punting it. And it's kind of funny today when we're like talking about.
Let me jump in here real quick. Emmett was like toe blowing the ball on goal kicks. That may or may not be an exaggeration. The game has evolved tremendously.
Yeah.
So like, for example, it's funny. We actually were playing a team like recently, and I'll get back to the point, but it's like, because in youth soccer, they think every team should play a certain formation and then not press. My argument with that is, you're not teaching decision making, and then you're not dealing with your certain strengths in a community, meaning maybe that community is just Richmond, or maybe that community is Des Moines, Iowa. Maybe it's Rio Grande in Texas. Well, those are all very different demographics. So you need to use your strengths in a community and then play a style of what those players are on that team. And so when this happened years ago, you found these youth players that, the way you beat the 4-3-3 is they were so used to playing where the center mid would drop in, split the center backs, and they're going to play. Well, like at Stetson, we high press and we're extremely aggressive. So we like teams that do that, because they're going to be like, well, we got to play. And then they don't want to ever play maybe one long ball. And so certain teams that do that, we try to take advantage of that with the personnel we have. So that's important for a player watching us. And when I see a player say, hey, coach, I like how aggressive you guys are in your like press, and where you guys possess the ball, where you look to possess it in the attacking third, then I know that they've actually spent time watching games and they actually evaluate before I can comment on what we do. That's an educated way to look at a style of play. And I actually give them games from 21, 22, because in 21 we played a 3-4-1-2, and we were probably a little bit more expansive in how we played. So you can tell how a team can even evolve in itself as well. So I think that's really important. And then when I recruit players, for example, there's a reason, I'm down at Orlando City 17s. Their coach trains a certain way. They play a certain way. I've never had an Orlando City player on that team ever transfer from my program. So statistically, I will recruit there, uh, if that makes sense, because that means that those players, it's a similar style in how we play and how they're coached. So when they come here, it's almost like they're already prepared. And you can find that in many different programs across, the U.S. in these these smaller environments and communities. But I think that's an important aspect, and it has to be obviously on the coach of the program, but also some of the clubs, because I don't want to watch just like vanilla soccer at the end of the day.
Right. So again, do your homework if you're interested in the school. So, all right. Well, we're over an hour now, so I want to again be respectful of your guys' time. I hope that you'll come back on again. It's been great. So really enjoyed it, and you've been very educational. Emmett, Tommy, not so much, but
Well, hey, I appreciate you having us on. I mean, there's so many topics to go over. Recruiting such a complex aspect to talk about, that there are so many other cool topics too. And I think you just being able to have something like this podcast that can educate not just the players, but parents as well, can go a long way and can really help people. So I think it's huge to have those sort of conversations and help people so that they can make the best decisions.
I appreciate that.
Hey, you got Kyle Simzak lined up for one of these pods yet?
I do not.
I think you might need him. Emmett mentored him out in Shreveport, Louisiana at Centenary.
Is that right?
Otherwise called Cemetery. Those are back in the days, Scott, where I was mowing my own field, aerating it, and it was, you learn a lot about yourself as a coach on some of the stuff you're doing outside your job. Yeah. So some humble beginnings out in Shreveport.
Yeah. But see, what you need is, you need down the line here a Culpeper pod with Emmett, Kilby from Mary Wash, and Glenn, and then you need a Woodbridge pod with me, Cheese, and Kyle Sims down the line. There you go. You're welcome.
Mike DiNuzzo as well.
Yeah, we
can get my brother on. He's full time with VDA now. He can come on. And
well, then we might have to get Seuss too.
Though. Oh, done. That'd be it. I'll just watch. I'll just listen.
I don't know if you're able to like cut this or not, but a really cool thing.
Let me stop.